Hi, everybody. My name is Andrea Mai with Pure Light Project, and today we're going to talk to Daniel James and Matthew Brower. They were recently on the Pure Light Project podcast, and so today we're doing a second segment, also live on YouTube, and then also it'll be on the podcast as well. So if you want to watch the interview, we've got it on YouTube and other video formats as I'm able. And then the podcast will have the conversation. So, but we're really today going to talk about what these two guys do. They have a third partner who wasn't able to join us today, but they do something really unique, at least from my perspective, where they help people set up trusts. And really, if I understand it right, it's a sort of a particular type of trust that really helps you live a life with a lot more freedom outside of a lot of tax liability and things of that. So I'm an amateur and I found these guys and I'm really glad because I know I'm going to be working with them in the next month or two here to get my trust set up after a beautiful conversation where Matthew educated me. Like in 30 minutes, he gave me more information that I had never heard anywhere. And I believe it's really life-changing it can be life-changing for a lot of people. So yeah, welcome you guys. If you want to know more about these two individually, I really suggest go and listen to the podcast, and there'll be a link to that in the notes for this. But so Daniel, Matthew, thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us back.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about, there's all kinds of trusts. After we talked the last time, I went and looked up, all I could basically find at the library, right, was living trusts. And that seemed to have a lot to do with probate and keeping your estate out of probate. Seemed very different than what you guys are talking about. So can you give us a sort of a high level view of the type of trust work that you do? And we'll start there.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to conceptualize this is that when you're dealing with an attorney, they are licensed by the state to create within their own little scheme of laws. They only know the jurisdiction which has granted them their license. And so the difference between what you would get dealing with an estate attorney or an attorney in general, trust attorney, and what we do is we are using our own private right to contract. So me and Daniel are not attorneys. We are just human beings, right? And what we are doing is we are establishing a trust using our own ability to draft and create contracts. And it's essentially what a trust is. And the one that we create is an irrevocable express trust. And so it's irrevocable in that once the assets are put into it, the person who puts it in can't take it out. Which you wouldn't want to anyways. There's just so much protection and benefit to having it in there that, there's no reason to. And it's express in that you are expressing through contract form the stipulations, the corpus, the bylaws of the trust and the nature of the trust in writing. And so there's a lot of implied trust that we are unaware of actually that are what give the government its claim of authority over us in the first place. So one of the kind of alchemical, more powerful aspects of this is that you are taking this control into your own hands. You are creating this own contract, and that contract has more weight. It's a higher contract than any implied contract that we've been sucked into.
Okay, that's a lot. And probably brand new information for most people. The idea of it being irrevocable, can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so with your living trust and things of that nature, people dealing with estate planning attorneys, they might create a revocable trust so that, if things change and they don't want their kids to get X, Y, and Z, or, they want to be able to take those assets out when it's advantageous to them, that revocable trust has the ability to do that. But one of the downsides of that is if it's revocable, and say some sort of giant tax liability gets thrown onto you, like they jack up your property taxes to, a ridiculous amount and you can't pay it, they can actually court order and reach into that trust, force you to revoke those assets from the trust to redeem their value for any given debt. An irrevocable trust that's not on the table in any way, shape, or form. It's a complete separation of ownership between you and the asset. The trust takes full title over the asset, and it's completely out of the hands of anybody else at that point.
Interesting. All right.
One of the things that I would really love for people coming into this information to just provide broader context is that, like yourself, or if anybody has done any sort of estate planning or worked with an attorney, or just gotten into, a little Google search about trusts, the question that I heard you also ask, Andrea, is like, oh, well, what kind of trust do you guys work with? Because the perception that somebody coming from the outside has is like, oh, well, there are, strict definitions for certain types and categories and things of that nature. And something that Javier said in our podcast that we do was people have kind of forgotten that they have the ability to like pick up a pen and create something with it. And so the actual benefit of what we're doing is kind of establishing the awareness of that broader context to help people understand that like these instruments are as amorphous and fluid as anyone wants to make them. So the power actually is not necessarily in what strict defined trust type are you operating, but understanding that you have the power to define the terms of that contract, and you have the power to make it as broad or as specific as possible. And so a lot of times, people are looking into this. And of course, if we're looking to those statutory agencies like the IRS or like the state law or the federal code, we're looking at certain predefined categories that they have created that ends up putting us into a certain classification under their, jurisdiction, under their ability to define, well, this type of trust is allowed to do this and that and the other thing, but it's liable here and here and here. Whereas, the broader picture is that over generations, we've kind of lost the ability to manage our own affairs in law. And this is something that, if you were to go back far enough, like, the founding fathers hated attorneys. They didn't like that concept, because when we outsource the ability to manage our affairs, then we lose a piece of awareness and understanding. And so what has happened over the past, couple hundred years of the country is that slowly those freedoms have been chipped away, and generation after generation, we just don't have the knowledge of what it was once like, what we used to have. And something that I said in that last podcast episode on our channel was, everybody should know how to grow a little bit of food. Everybody should know how to do some basic maintenance on their vehicle. Everybody should know how to manage their own business, and everybody should know a little bit of managing their own legal affairs. And so, there's a broader conversation that we need to have to help people understand what jurisdiction is, how it's derived, and where these various entities claiming authority over our private affairs are deriving that authority from. Because on one hand, as Americans, we understand, well, the government comes from the consent of the governed, but also we have this sort of like authoritarianism vein that runs through us too, which is just like, well, that's the rules, do what you're told, this is how it is, that's the authority figure. And we're now at this point of like push coming to shove, where there's all these crazy things happening and mandates and forcing this and that and all of these other things. And so it's kind of like we're the founders enshrined these protections and awareness, and we're now being like, okay, this is a mantle that we have to personally take up. We have to take the sword and shield of our legal affairs. We can't hire an army of attorneys to fight for us, because we actually don't know where their allegiances are. And so we're beginning to realize, just like growing your own food, make sure that you have the pure food that you want to eat. Administering your own legal and financial affairs is how you make sure that you're not outsourcing your power to someone who's going to put you under someone else's rule set and someone else's jurisdiction.
Yeah, you know, most of what I do, I do healing work, right, and helping people with transformation. And how many people tell me, you know, same sort of concept, right? We outsource our power to, you know, the doctor who told us so and so, but we don't trust our own body telling us what we need. You know, we don't trust that. We've lost so much of, you know, what was maybe even 50 or 60 years ago fairly common knowledge about how to deal with a headache without popping a handful of pills. You know, we've lost so many of those abilities because we just gave it away. It was easier, it was convenient, and people made it look really overwhelming, right? It seemed to be beyond what maybe we aren't smart enough, maybe we aren't sophisticated enough to handle these things. And so from our body to our, as you said, our sort of our legal affairs. So what you guys have talked about so far, what I'd love for you to do is give a little bit of a breakdown of what is the benefit of this for me. You know, I run a business. I own a home. I am married. You know, like what are some of the benefits if I was coming to you and saying, hey guys, I think I understand what you're doing, but how does it really play out in my life? What does it give me?
Yeah, so being that you operate a business, a service business, and especially since it's spiritually oriented, you know, one of the glorious things about the founding fathers and our original Constitution is that it grants us the ability to determine what our religion is for ourselves. And we like to protect that and encourage that in everybody. You know, I myself am a Christian, you know, granted a type of Christian that most Christians wouldn't agree with, but it doesn't matter to me what somebody's spiritual convictions are. I believe that God has created us with the sovereignty to decide for ourselves how we want to honor that. And so the current structure that you're dealing with to do business, whether that is you have a sole proprietorship or a C Corp or an LLC, that is the vessel that is taking in that money. And so the reason why that vessel is open to tax liability is because it is a creation of the state. You apply to the state to get that entity, and it is their property. And so the way the government sees it is, oh, you're reaping benefits from using our property. Well, now we get a cut. And so what you do with the trust is you create it of your own will. You are the only authority that has any say over what goes on with it. And so when people grant money to your trust as the new business entity type, all of that is outside of the realm of their tax laws. And so in one way, you would have a trust for your business and a separate trust for your property. And in that way, anything happens to your business, you know, if somebody flies off the handle, says that your advice caused them to do X, Y, or Z, and now they want to come after you for some liability, that business trust is a separate island of itself. It has nothing to do with you liability wise, and same with your property. So anything that happens to one trust is completely separate from any other. And as far as property goes, you know, property that's held in the trust, and if that's a part of your spiritual mission as well, which it is, I mean, in order to do your spiritual work, you need a place to live. You can actually apply for property tax exemptions when your property is owned by that trust. You know, in various different counties and, you know, jurisdictions, you may not get the tax exempt status, but it is completely and totally possible to get. And then also, you know, like I said before, if the IRS starts going crazy with some brand new tax rates that want to take 90% of your money, they can't take that house as a part of a claim of a debt. So if they come after you personally, anything held in trust is outside of their reach. So those are two major benefits that you would see by structuring through trust rather than, alternative entity types.
That's cool. Daniel, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, just to simplify it down, it's like the two major things that we're doing is protection from liability. And that's, that's a nuanced thing, because the financial side of liability is the easy part. But obviously, like if you go out to run a restaurant or a medical practice or something where there's a possibility of malpractice or other types of liability, like someone being harmed or having a lawsuit, they're a little bit different. But in most cases, we can structure so that the financial liability is taken care of. So in those instances, they will not be on the chopping block. Your property or your bank accounts will not be on the chopping block for a liability incurred by the person if they're held by the trust. And then the other thing is just the ability to govern one's own legal affairs and keep things private. The beauty of these trust instruments is that because they're created of the private right of contract, they're not immediately registered in any way, shape, or form. They can be, if you have certain business goals, you can absolutely try to structure one of your trusts more like a business, register it, obtain credit, various things. Or it can be something that's completely not on the knowledge of anyone except for the parties of the trust, or your relevant business partners, like the banking institution that you do. And so it's a reframing of the conditioning that a lot of us are under, which is like, we're so used to just giving all of our personal information at this point with the internet and everything else. And I even remember my parents' and grandparents' generation being like even very protective over their phone numbers and not giving their phone numbers out. So inhabiting the role of trustee, you gain firsthand experience administering your affairs, where let's say you want to open a bank account with your trust. Well, you have the privilege and the right, and also the expectation, to only disclose that which is relevant to that third party that you're operating with. So the bank does not need to see anything more than the basic trust declaration and indentures. It doesn't need to know who your beneficial interests are. It doesn't need to know the corpus and the internal structure. We use bylaws because people are kind of familiar with that from the nonprofit world, like the bylaws, that's the corpus of the trust. So who gets what money under what conditions? If I pass away, who gets title to my property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is an incredible perspective shift, as well as the thing that most people don't realize with this too, is that what the wealthy families have done is sort of, instead of, we know that living trusts can be used to avoid probate court and avoid some tax there, but there's a secret that people don't really realize, in which is the power of, rather than the beneficiary, who is the person who would be receiving, that in the event of the trust declaration saying that they will receive that, is actually the power of the successor trustee. So what we've seen in our case studies and certain examples, what has happened, which we will never be able to really truly know the inner details of Kennedy family trusts and Trump or any other wealthy person over time who's most likely used these. We see kind of the ripple effect. But to avoid that liability and to avoid those taxable events, rather than dispersing the wealth within the family coffers, they pass the key down from generation to generation. And that is, rather than the beneficiary receiving the income to their person as a taxable event, they're passing the stewardship position along. So the next generation becomes the new trustee, and the next generation becomes the new trustee. And in that, they're in a position of neutrality where they can benefit from the use of the trust property and take stipends for living expenses, etc. But no money is ever having to be transferred from person to person, which would incur a taxable event. And so really, we turn the pyramid upside down, and we say, okay, well, I'm now, I've in many situations, if someone really wants to take to the far conclusion of what's possible, like Matt and myself, we have taken a personal vow of poverty to own nothing. But we are here in service to the mission of our trust that we've set up. And in that way, no trust business, no revenue, no beneficiaries will be served if we are not also sheltered, fed, transported, etc. So those things become expenses as opposed to income events. And so we're really trying to build this airtight container in which we can keep things within, and then we're not entangling ourselves with the system around us, which is really has gotten to a point where it is wrapping, very deep within everybody's personal affairs. It wasn't always that way.
So there's a lot of language that you guys use that, is probably very unfamiliar to most people, right? Corpus, right? I mean, that's just the language, right? That's the body of the contract, the written aspects of it. Just as a side note, are there any resources that you can recommend to somebody who wants to get a real ABC sort of elementary understanding of this that would help them have a conversation with you?
Well, we do have some supplemental material on our website. One of them is a PDF that you can sign up for on our website called Principles of Trusteeship. And that is, it kind of takes the form of kind of a dense legal document, but it does, so you may need to read it 3 or 4 times in order to really absorb everything that it's trying to tell you. When you're dealing with this stuff, as you said, there's so much new terminology. It's a whole different world. They have a whole different dictionary for their terms. So it does require some motivation to learn and understand the terms. But we do have that document, Principles of Trusteeship. You just punch in your email and it gets sent there. And then on top of that, we also recommend people look into Weiss's Concise Trustee Handbook. And that is a good jumping off point. We have, since the time that was published, we have kind of pushed the envelope to whole new levels. But the Weiss's Concise Trustee Handbook does a really good job of laying out kind of the framework that makes all of this possible, and kind of just shows beyond any shadow of a doubt that this stuff is lawful and well established. Not even some sort of new fringe thing, but it's very old and very well established in our legal system. So those are 2 things that I would recommend.
And I would say too, it's, similarly to how we discussed earlier, the information that's available is sort of like not geared towards the DIY approach. You can find information about different types of trusts. You can do research, and various attorneys and different legal websites have demonstrated some of the terminology, but it's not really put together in a way that facilitates somebody really knowing how to do it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, it's good to research and good to look that stuff up, but really we're also, as people are on this journey with us, we're very open to the specific questions that anyone has, because we don't really see anybody else out there, creating this education like as we're attempting to do with Frontier Capital Trust, to help people become the best trustees imaginable, to help people take the responsibility, become sovereign in their financial and legal affairs, and to understand everything step by step, so that they could, of their own effort, look up the resource and go, this is how to do it. I'm going to do it now. So, what Matt and I and others have had to do to achieve and arrive at this point is, like, for me, the trust piece was like one of the final, like the capstone of my awareness of all the common law and financial stuff. And that really started to come into focus 2014 and 2015. But, there's a lot of, we have sorted through all of the various breadcrumbs and gone through the groups of, chat rooms and Facebook groups and all these things where there's a lot of the blind leading the blind and a lot of hypotheses, but not a lot of trial and error. And we've gone through that process over time, and there's not really like one solid resource for like, learn everything common law, learn everything about trust law. It really has been sort of, not completely obliterated, but it has been that awareness of how to administer our own affairs has been kind of like shattered into a million pieces. And now we're kind of trying to figure out how to put them back together, because we're dealing with law as almost like the arcane at this point. And unless you go to Harvard or Yale and, or some other kind of prestigious law school, and even in those situations, just like you mentioned, the metaphor of like medical industry, the doctors are all specialized, the attorneys are all specialized, and they're dealing with very specific acute issues in the broader context of this massive federal government and statutory law, which didn't always have to be that way. So the research of trust law, I mean, you know, Weiss is a really great jumping off point, and we're attempting to also break down Weiss in a little bit more of a digestible fashion, as well as add the legal research and the case laws bit by bit. And that's really where Javier excels, is diving really deep into the case laws. Because man, that research is probably challenging even for an attorney to do, because it's so many different decentralized pieces of information. So I would just say, if anyone out there has those questions, please reach out to us, because this is the beginning of, we're starting to segue now as the year is ending. We have our first couple of modules done, and now we're really trying to record content based on people's questions. So we could do a series of videos just on what is a beneficiary, what is a grantor, what's the difference between the declaration of trust and the corpus, all of these different arcane languages. But there really isn't a good resource right now for one place to go and just see it all laid out and spelled out for people. So we're attempting to create that. And we value anybody at any point in the process to come and reach out to us, because we will start to compile the questions in a way that we know what needs to be answered. Because this comes very intuitively to Matt and I, but I mean, for me, it's a journey of over 10 years of picking up the bits and pieces along the way. And I don't even remember some of the you know, my predecessors who forged the path ahead, because we're talking about old YouTube videos that are probably no longer online. You know, Facebook is now heavily censored. You know, there are still some groups out there on Facebook where people are having the discussion, but it's a very perilous landscape, because, you know, we don't really want to mess around and make mistakes with legal and courtroom and various aspects, because, you know, the stakes are very high in that. And thankfully, there have been others who have pushed the envelope farther that allowed Matt and I to get to this point where we've now operated these entities. You know, I'm on my 7th year now of my trust, and I was one of the first people in our peer group to go out and start a brick and mortar service business under my Healing Arts Ministry Trust. So there's a lot of ways that we're breaking the ground and becoming more confident. And I wish there was one easy, like, yeah, just go to legal.com and look up the terms. It's going to be a combination of looking at Black's Law Dictionary, seeing the perspective of the attorneys that have written about this, keeping in context that they are within a specific strata of legal information, so you can glean some insights off of their perspective, and just really trying to get whatever you can from whatever direction. We're really doing our best to hopefully compile all of that and become that resource.
Yeah, and kudos to you guys, because it is a lot. You know, I worked for years as an insurance underwriter, and like, to go through, like you'd said, you might have to read it 3 or 4 times, and you might have to pull out some resource books, you know, visit your library, do some digging around to really get an understanding of when they use it this way versus over here in this sentence, like, and to tie, our brains aren't currently wired, most of us, to piece all of those things together. But it can be done. Like, I want people to really understand that it can be done. You guys are doing this, have done this. You're creating a really valuable program to work with people. Sometimes it's good to know, like, just like something silly, you know, I can start a fire with one match. I spent a long time learning how to, me and one other friend were the one match fire starter club. You know I can do it. I don't always have to do it, you know, but give yourself the equipment, at least to understand the basics. And so how does this, I mean, so when we were talking at the festival that we all attended together, you know, one of the things that inspired me a great deal was the notion that I could reduce or remove my tax liability. You know, this was, I mean, that was pretty important. And not just because, you know, I mean, we all have our reasons why we want to do this. Yeah, it's more money in your pocket at the end of the month that you then can determine, or at the end of the year, at the end of your life, that you know, that you get to choose how it's put to use. But that's, to me, that's like a huge benefit, certainly not the only one, but it is a big one that would maybe, if other people, I don't have children, right? So when I think about beneficiaries, I'm like, right now, I'm just thinking, how does it affect my life if I set this trust up, my life and the life of, my wife and I, right? And then I'll think further. So right now, reducing my taxes, that's a pretty big benefit, because all the good work that I can then go on and do with that extra income. I'd love to hear you guys talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as far as the beneficiary goes, your beneficiary can be a cause, it can be a community, it can be an individual. And no matter what you decide, that beneficiary, by nature of this contract, is private. And so that means even if you don't name a beneficiary per se, any entity that comes in contact with your trust, whether it be the bank or any outside entity whatsoever, they have to treat your trust as if there is a beneficiary and as if that beneficiary is not their business. So that's one way of looking at it. And not having children is definitely not a bar to being able to utilize this trust for that reason. You can make the beneficiaries of the trust, the suffering children of the world. And we can make it as concise or as broad as you would like to do. And then, if you just have a successor named, then it doesn't really matter who the beneficiary is anyways, because they'll just take over when it's done. But I did also want to mention about the complexity of the learning curve when it comes to this stuff. One thing to always keep in mind is that common law is unwritten. It's based on natural law, which is just truth. And so when you are getting in touch with yourself, know thyself, the way to simplify all of this is to just look at your own direct experience and think about natural law, in that when you go to do something, you don't naturally turn around and ask somebody above you if it's okay for you to do it. And that's one way of showing the true jurisdiction is not what we think it is. In our own direct experience, the common law is that each individual has the right and the ability to determine for themselves what they want to do. And so if you keep these kind of core concepts in mind, you will see how that is reflected in all of the more complex thinking down the line. But I just wanted to add that.
That's great. Yeah, I had heard something. I was listening to a podcast, I think the other day, or a YouTube video, and it was talking about, we've been on maritime law versus common law, and that with the shifts that are happening, that we will be moving back much more substantially. I think it was in relation to the banking system specifically, but that we will be shifting much more and fairly quickly to more of a common law approach to things over the next handful of years, probably. Again, one YouTube video, one comment, but it stuck with me because of the conversations that I've had with you guys around common law. So
it really does seem that we're really at the precipice of some major changes in more way than one. I mean, what's happening on the planet right now has never happened before. And, whether you look at that in energy or spiritual side of things, astrology, or just, reading the tea leaves as the global events are occurring, it really does feel like the push is for us to really figure out how to be not independent in the sense of egoic, I'm on my own, but cutting ties with things that are beyond our understanding, whether this is environmental issues or the legal issues we're talking about, or the food supply or whatever. We're really being called to understand the karma, the cause and effect of our own actions, and what we've been through our ignorance supporting this whole time. So whether there's some divine spiritual energetic flow to that transition we're in, or if it's just a process, once people get this, once you understand the way that Matt and I understand, the dominoes are going to fall. This information will not be so cutting edge in a few years, and hopefully at some point everybody will have trusts and they'll go, oh, I get it now. It's just like how I felt 10 years ago. I'd be like, I wish people understood the importance of organic food more, and da da da. And now there's little, you know, vegan restaurants and juice bars and everything everywhere. It's the information is hitting that mass consciousness, and you know, it's just gonna happen because the maritime admiralty law stuff is really about commerce, and it has commercialized everything. So this gets into some of that legal language being arcane and archaic and having double meanings, because the birth certificate has that word association through the birth of the ship loading its cargo at the docks. There's all these little things that have basically you know, turned us into commercial instruments. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. It took, you know, a couple hundred years from the inception of the country through the Civil War. I think we talked a little bit of that last time. You know, we've all become these commercial debt instruments, which is how they are able to boss us around like chattel property. We are just, you know, cows grazing in the field, you know, and they're eyeing us up and seeing what kind of chops they're going to get out of us, because they know they could take us to market and make some good money off of it. If they could just keep us working, keep us grazing out in the field without an awareness of where we are, they're going to do real, whoever is pulling the strings, whatever they are, you know, I don't know. I can't conceptualize the faceless evil hand in the background or whatever, they, you know, whoever they are, you know, somebody understands that if they can keep control over us, they're going to profit very well, and they're going to have more power. And we're waking up to the fact that people are now, because of the past 2 years and the events of the past 2 years and the aggressive pushing forward of a becoming more and more obvious agenda, right? People are like, oh, I better start thinking about this stuff. So for me being in this position the past like 10 years of being like, oh my God, why won't anyone listen to me? The money's fake. And they turned us into Pinocchio. We've become paperwork, you know, fictions. And I've been saying this stuff. I went back and looked at my old Facebook and I was like, wow, I really have been doing this for like 15 years. I've been saying the same thing over and over and over again. But now people are listening. And Matt and Javier and I, we get it intuitively and conceptually, and we can teach people about it now. We just have to figure out exactly how. So I've noticed a huge shift in that direction. So even if it was just your intuition that picked up on that comment of like, we're going to be out of maritime law soon. I don't know what's going to happen next, but once the cat is out of the bag and people realize, oh, this is how the global banking system works. This is how that legal part is. We were actually born free. And the country, especially as Americans that we live in, was designed to respect those freedoms. How the heck are we going through all this invasive crap and just letting it happen and just saying, well, I don't know, that's the police officer, that's the politician, that's what they do. So once everybody hits that 100th monkey of awakening, it's just not going to be able to happen anymore, because people will be confident enough to stand up to it, and you know, it just won't matter. So who knows what's coming next? But I just thought that was interesting that you picked up on that. And I can really say that that's true to my experience, that things are changing and we are having this awakening process. So yeah, I think we're all riding the wave and picking up on the pieces that, you know, resonate most with our unique perspectives.
Well, and just like really gingerly, I guess I touch on that. And we talk a lot about sovereignty in these circles that we are in, you know, and it's becoming a very common idea that, you know, my dad has always talked about sort of personal responsibility, self-responsibility. That was ingrained in me. You know, if you screw up, own it, right? You know, well, one of the things that we need to own collectively is that we chose to continue to let somebody else do the heavy lifting for us. And now we're here to kind of, and it doesn't matter in all areas of our life, right? We kept, I mean, the car, right? I have a car who I can't even change the light bulb, the light bulbs in, because it's become so complex, you know, because I kept buying into that, right? That somehow an upgrade would be better. And suddenly, I can't even change my own light bulb. What would have taken me 5 minutes before, now I have to like make a half a day event of it, right? It's little things. I'm not a ranty kind of person, but it's just little moments in my life where I notice, oh, we collectively gave up enough control of ourselves. And it is a choice. It's all a choice. And we have to own that whether it was we, me, Andrea, or the generations before me, whatever, each of us individually have the opportunity to step into our power with our health, with our well-being, with our finances, and stop being afraid to have a conversation. Conversation and confrontation aren't the same thing. If you come from a place of openness and curiosity, and also knowing yourself, take the time to know yourself a little bit more and more every day. And suddenly you're not afraid to have that, to ask the questions that somebody told you shouldn't ask, right? Or it's just easier if you just do it this way. So anyways, that's probably as much as you'll ever hear me. But that's the theme, that's the thread through everything, right? Let's own it, and we will heal all of this, and we will shift this thing that we're going through. So
if I could also really quickly, I kind of went on a tangent when you mentioned that comment in the YouTube video, but one thing that was coming up for me when Matt was talking about, like, the benefits, and maybe you don't have a beneficiary, or maybe that's your community or whatever. The thing that has come up for me the most, and that I've working with people, I've started to see what it is that we all want to build, which is a better world. And I got into this also too, because the spiritual tradition that I'm a part of in Meher Baba, before he passed away, he left his compound in India where his tomb is, and there's also a spiritual center in Myrtle Beach. That was all left to trust, and it was sort of like similar to like Jesus and the disciples. Baba had his mandale, and the mandale were the original trustees of the trust. And when you look at some of the stuff that we talked about last time, and this time we focus a little bit more on the legal jargon, but when you look at that spiritual component of like what the actual word trust means, and what we're looking at growing into here, which is, okay, I believe the founding fathers were correct when they said there should be no other worldly authority aside from, the power that is God, creator, what have you, over individuals. The rest should be an agreement that we have between each other. We're really looking at stepping into that. And what does that mean? It means living for the next 7 generations. It means it's not about my, me, mine, profit, and I'm going to have mansions and Lamborghinis, or be Jeff Bezos and fly to the moon or whatever. It's about everything that I'm being trusted with, everything that is manifesting in my life through this act of co-creation as, the children of the divine. This is for others that are not me. And yes, I can live a very good life. I can be well taken care of, because, it wouldn't be the highest and best outcome for all if we had to sacrifice our own well-being to, and that's that, I think we're working through that whole like Messiah savior complex thing too. Like, we should also be able to receive abundance and be taken care of and all of that. But what is it really about? It's about building something for the future. So the spiritual and healing retreat model is really where I see a lot of the rising edge of consciousness in people. We're all like, we're trying to figure out how to build this freaking amazing world that's full of tree houses and gardens and fresh food and love and entertainment and freedom, and nobody has to work 60 hours a week for $10 an hour, because we really could create a paradigm of abundance here, that we are overflowing it with everything that we need, so we can give it away to everyone else. We can create a charitable container for the whole world. But we're in the process right now of extracting ourselves from the sticky tar of all the negative unconscious forces. And so, the spiritual retreat center, everybody who's, especially in our area, coming to Western North Carolina, wants to get their slice of pie in the mountains and build the thing, right? When we figure out how to all do that together and share abundantly and be charitable towards one another, it's really just as the dominoes of the old world fall, the new one's going to raise up, and it's going to be amazing. So that is what I have seen, and some of it directly through my experiences with the people who get this stuff, who are ready to lead, but also and from a spiritual place of visions and dreams, I'm seeing this world, and that's what keeps me going through all the, oh my God, everything's falling apart, this is so crazy, they're doing what now, the government this, I'm like, wait, this is all part of the process. You've seen these things, you've felt these things, the people who are waking up to this material are going to grab the reins and take us there. and say it's not easy, but I see it and I know that's where we're going. So that's really, at the end of the day, Matt and Javier and I, that is our charitable mission, is to get this information out there to participate in that awakening. And some of it's ministry, sharing the information, helping people get out of debt, protecting their stuff. And the other part is like practical, grounded earth sign. We have to build revenue, because how are we going to build the schools or the mess halls or the gardens and farms? So we're really balancing both of those worlds. And it's just such a cool way to live financially. It takes the whole, like, Matt and I are not people who are pissed off about, oh, I got to clock in today. And oh my God, I hate my situation and my boss and my this, and I got to pay the tax man. Like, we're totally free from all of that. And it comes with the responsibility, but it's also really awesome. You know, it's just a lot of fun to live this way.
That's awesome. That is so awesome to hear. I agree. Like, the idea of clocking in, I can't do it. Not anymore. Too many years like that. And to those who that's the way they want to work, and wonderful, you know. But for those of you who it doesn't work for, know that there are lots of options. So here's just one question that I'd love to hear you see if you guys have an answer to. Say you have, this is a very practical question, okay? You have all of your investment tied up in funds that are technically retirement accounts, right? That you can't access supposedly without penalty until a certain age. And I wonder if you guys have had experience in helping to navigate that. Well, is that situation something that setting up a trust could give you access to those funds sooner than later? Is that something you've dealt with?
Our business partner Javier has. And Daniel, do you remember exactly what type of investment account he was dealing with?
Well, so, I mean, Javier deals with a lot of like Forex and stock market stuff. So a lot of times we're just plugging in the information of the trust, the EIN, the attached information to begin operating that container. And it's really best for people to set up prior to rather than later, because when we're talking about incurring liability, it's like, you know, I keep using this metaphor of like the water flowing into the cup. You have these different cups, right? Mm-hmm. This is the person, the personal banking, the Social Security, and this is the trust. You know, if the water is poured into the person first and then into the trust, there may be some protections there, but the liability was incurred and the taxable event was when the water came in here. So it really comes down to a level of what people are comfortable with, because you know, we have had people stave off their foreclosures with this information. That is obviously something that a lot of people would never even entertain that unless they had no other choice. And so I look forward to hopefully getting some of those people to speak publicly about some of their experiences. But so the power of the protection side of the trust is that, you know, for those of us who are wanting to be on the front lines, it kind of empowers you to be a little bit more like, okay, come and get me. What are you going to do? However, that is not where everybody in the general population is at. And so it depends on your comfort level. You know, ideally with a 401k or something like that, you would come up with an alternative using your trust from the get-go so that that liability is never incurred to begin with. However, just to say that, you know, you want to take money out of your 401k, there may be some leeway there. But you have contracted via the person and the Social Security information into a specific type of investment account that has a certain rule. So it's not to say that the deal is done and there's no way out, but it'll probably be more of a thing on the comfort level of the individual to say, well, I can wait another 10, 15, 20 years or whatever, and just, I did that, I made that choice, let me move forward now from this way. Or we might be able to get creative and see, you know, that would be something we would love to talk to you about further, Andrea, in a consult or something. But it's not a done deal. It's not like, you know, you're not screwed forever, but there's definitely a little bit more of a nuance to make sure we don't, like, you know, trigger another tax event, or nobody really likes having a letter from the IRS sent to them. Whether they feel confident or not to fight that or to disregard it is another thing. And I think I told a little bit of my story to you personally, or in the last podcast, where when I stopped paying my income tax in 2013, I've gotten letters over the years that have slowly, the IRS has basically begged me for a lower and a lower and a lower amount until I now have it. I'm not at home right now, but I have the letter on my desk. I can take a picture of it. It's like $74. It used to be like $3,000 or $4,000, and over the years they've just been like, well, how about 600? How about 300? Hey, it's just us again. Another year has passed. How about 74? So at a certain point, unless you've got like you're a big fish to fry and there's millions of dollars in those accounts, the little guys, most of us, will never have to worry about that because we're not worth wasting legal fees and attorney fees and all that stuff over. But yeah, I guess the simplest answer is it's better to be set up ahead of time with foreknowledge than try to extracting yourself from a contract that you already have set up is a little bit more challenging.
Okay, that's good information. That's good information. So for those of you who are watching this, I really do encourage you to connect with Daniel and Matthew. And I haven't met Javier, but Javier sounds like he's got a lot of wisdom and chops that he's bringing to this endeavor that you guys are working on. I think it's phenomenal. Like I said in the podcast, I've spent a lot of time in financial communities, particularly the FIRE community, and people looking to kind of navigate out of the system. And this was the first time I had encountered it. And I've been talking to different people since we first met. And, some people are like, oh, I guess I need to look into it. Some have looked into it, but they still haven't taken, the steps to do it because it does require effort, right? It requires a little effort and sometimes timing and getting things in order. So what is, I would love for you to each offer maybe a tip of what is something that would inspire somebody to take action sooner than later that you could offer them. Like, what is one thing that is going to make them get up and do something about this if they are curious, if it's really calling to them?
I would say that there is no certainty in the future, and you may be able to anticipate what your tax situation looks like now, but you never know what happens in the future. And it could be a really good thing, like you get an inheritance from a family member that you are completely unaware of that's dedicated to you right now. And in those cases, we've had people reach out to us and they kind of just fade off in the background and then come back a couple months later and ask us like, hey, could this have, avoided this problem? We're like, yeah, absolutely. But I think really what it comes down to is we have to suspend our disbelief. If you're hearing about this stuff, if you have a hard ingrained belief that, the only two things in life are certain, death and taxes, you need to suspend that disbelief and entertain the notion of what we are saying, and that it is possible to legally structure yourself so that you're not paying 30% of your income for income taxes in most cases. And it is possible to make investments without paying 40% capital gains. It is possible to protect any asset that you have from ever having a chance to be seized or liened from you. And it is also possible to set up a container for future generations without probate and without any sort of inheritance taxes as well. And the finer details of how exactly you do that, it's our job to educate you on how that works from step to step. Our educational system is we cover everything from the ground up. We give you the paperwork, the education, the follow-up, the online course, everything, to make sure that you are fully educated in what you are doing to take control of your own life.
That's wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, and I guess I would say, what is the best motivation for this? Well, yes, I mean, for me, it's I've really seen my own sort of like, you know, what is it, Joseph Campbell and the archetype of the hero's journey and all of that. You know, I jumped and I took a leap of faith into this. I said, I see what I know is wrong, and I don't want to put my trust or my energy or my money into that anymore. And I'm going to turn towards the only thing that I feel really can have authority over what happens here, which is, you know, my conception of the divine, of God. And it has really shifted my life in a sense of being able to step back into that position of the observer, to really live the meaning of trust, and to, you know, allow things to come and go and happen, and trust that I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be taken care of. I'm going to be able to fulfill my mission. And it's just such a much different way of going about things, as opposed to, all right, well, I've got to start this business. Where's my capital going to come from? I've got to either get investors or a loan or all this stuff, which always will tie you into somebody else's desires. Whether that's investors or being publicly traded or getting a loan, you are putting yourself under somebody else's. At the end of the day, their demand will, if you do not fulfill that side of that contract, which maybe it doesn't seem like it's much of a contract because you're just getting some money from a bank and you can do what you want with it. But if you're not able to fulfill that obligation that you've taken on, there's always going to be a repercussion there. And so I have found that starting the trust has been a much more fertile ground, spiritually, energetically, and financially in business, to really create something, to really like the seed cannot be planted in the concrete. Sure, it can break out from underneath from the soil, but you need that fertile soil. And I feel energetically that, you know, stepping out of this pyramid scheme, this financial siphoning of energy that goes up to only, you know, benefit those at the top of the pyramid, there's something that the universe and the act of creation itself respects about this work. And just for me to get out on the mystic path for a bit. And then as far as the risk and everything, you know, our students and our clients can determine what they feel comfortable with. And financially, Matt, Javier, and I have set this up as a charitable organization. Frontier Capital Trust is a charitable organization with a goal to serve everybody with this information and adjust and distribute equitably. So that means whatever we work out with you, whether you're one of the high rollers, millions of dollars, you're going to save hundreds of thousands every year, whatever we agree on financially is going to be a tax write-off for you for your donation to our cause. And then we're going to be able to be facilitated to spend more time educating for free, producing more videos, more content, and doing our community courses where we take the lower income people and we get 10 or 15 of them together and educate all at the same time. So really, we've done our best to make this like a net zero, like free thing for people. And it's, I think our only struggle on our end of it, in trying to eliminate that risk of fear for people, is that it almost seems like it's too good to be true, and people are just like, oh, it's really okay, I can get the tax write-off, so you're telling me it's free? What are you guys doing? What's going on here? And we're also telling people, like, you know, here's what we feel the value is. We're open to negotiation. So we're really doing business in a totally different way that's so paradigm shifting that I think it's just shocking to people. So we have done the best that we possibly can to say, do it now, do it today, get started, set yourself up, go at your own pace, you know, don't worry about the investment, we'll give you the tax write-off for it. And so I think, you know, the motivation is to finally break the chains of your conditioning and give it a shot and see what's possible. You don't have to switch all your finances over at once. You can start where you're comfortable, give that a couple years, see if you feel all right with just, you know, protecting your cryptocurrency or your stocks or whatever. And then maybe a couple years later you go, oh, I haven't gotten a letter from anybody or anything. Maybe I do want to restructure my business now, which is, you know, and of course people are, you know, those fears are justifiable. We have to make income. We have to take care of our families. We have to pay the bills. But I really do feel like we are offering a transistor that is going to shift that energy to where we're all going to be able to create that world where that's not as much of a fear-based control mechanism to keep us going in this, to keep us with what's familiar, because that's the only way we know how to take care of ourselves. So it's a big life decision, but we encourage people to make it.
Yeah. It's, the more I talk to you guys, the more I research it. Absolutely. I know that I'm like, it's actively in the works, like it's going to happen very soon. So this is December 2nd, 2021. We're filming this, and coming in, I guess my question for you, one really simple thing, and we can end there, is a trust set up. If say somebody sets it up on January 15th, does it everything affect from January 15th on, or is it affect that whole calendar year? Is it from the day you establish your trust, or does it affect, like, these are little practical tips that somebody might have any idea about?
Yeah, so what matters most is when the money starts hitting the trust. So you can set it up on the 15th, and if you restructure your fares, like in your case, if you move your payment gateways over to your trust on January 5th or 15th or whatever, from that point on, those are no longer taxable events. So all you need to do is just keep track of when you start doing that. And then anything prior to that, you know, the first couple of weeks of January, you would file a little return for that if you want. I mean, if you really set up these bulletproof containers and you're only going to be on the hook for $300 worth of taxes, I personally would not worry about it at all, especially because if they do come after you, say, okay, you can have 100% of nothing. I don't have anything. The trust does. You can have it all, you know? And so that's kind of the way I would look at it. It's really about when the money starts going into the trust and from where, as opposed to, you know, incurring the liability by hitting your personal bank account.
All right.
So it's not a huge deal if you don't get it right by, you know, January 1st of 2022. It's just some minor record keeping that, you know, you'd have to pay attention to.
And we'd tell people, you know, it's your comfort level. Like, if you feel it's best to tie up your loose ends just to prevent any possible future interaction, that feels the safest to you, do that. If you have the plausible deniability of, oh, well, you know, our business just didn't make it this year, and I can't, businesses go out of business and can't handle their liabilities. So I'm sorry, but we've closed that LLC or that C Corp down and it doesn't exist anymore. You know, we're dealing with bureaucracy that is very slow moving. And so, you know, a couple weeks of January 2022, unless you made $1 million in that first week or something like that, I would echo Matt and say, don't worry about it too much. But that's a conversation that we can flesh out all the details. And it really is unique to the person and how they're structured and, you know, what all the moving parts are. So
awesome. Well, thank you both for being here today. And the information for these two will be in the description for the video. If this is on the podcast, again, it'll be in the show notes. And you can find all of these recordings also on purelightproject.com. And thank you for being here. Thank you for doing what you guys are doing and doing it so you're doing it in a great way. I keep waiting to be like shocked or surprised, right? And you guys, you're very, I respect the way you guys are approaching this very much. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, this is great. It was a great opportunity to flesh everything out. And I feel very uplifted and excited for the future. So thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that you picked up on what we were saying. You picked up on the vibe and decided that it was important, and you've, you know, done something about it in trying to get the word out to the people in your sphere of influence. So it's a pleasure to be here and I appreciate it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.